Good afternoon and welcome to News24. We are live in our Cape Town studio discussing the story of the day, the conviction of now murderer Henri van Breda on 3 counts of murder and a count of attempted murder, and of course defeating the ends of justice. Joining me today in studio is criminal defense attorney William Booth and News24 journalist Tammy Petersen, who's been covering this case right from the start. Tammy, you were there today. Tell us about that moment when Judge Desai said guilty, guilty, guilty.
I think the insinuation had already been there earlier in the day when Judge Desai said that there was no proof of an intruder. I think everybody knew then. But because his whole defense was based on this balaclava-clad intruder who supposedly killed his family. And as soon as Judge Desai said he found this improbable,
yes,
there was no question anymore. So I think when it actually reached the point of Judge Desai handing down his judgment, everybody, including him, probably knew, because he had no expression.
I just wanted to say his
none.
face was stone-faced, blank, didn't have any emotion.
And I mean, it would be unfair to say that throughout the trial he had been emotionless, because there had been occasions when Dr. Anthony had been giving the pathologist report.
Yes.
He became quite tearful when, also when his emergency call was played. He also had a strong emotional reaction to it. But when Judge Desai convicted him, he had the same expression he had had from this morning when he arrived, all the way to when he was actually led down by the police officers to be taken into custody.
Incredible. William, Judge Desai made no secret of the fact throughout the trial that he was skeptical of Henri's version. And then right at the end, he praised the prosecution for putting together such a good case. Would you agree with him that the prosecution did a really good case in this instance?
I think they did, but one has to sort of preface that by saying it was circumstantial evidence. You know, there was no direct evidence, no witness that could come and say this happened, except Henri van Breda himself. And somebody asked me earlier, should the defense have called him? And I said, yes, they had really no option. If they didn't call him, well, that would have been the end of the matter. But his evidence was not good. Judge Desai criticized it on many, many respects. And, you know, it's difficult for an accused to testify, particularly when the media's there, the matter's being televised, the tension is there. It's very difficult for an accused to go and get in the witness stand and tell what had happened. So judges must never be overcritical if an accused person differs in certain respects in his testimony. Because, you know, it goes back a few years, and when you can't remember exactly everything, you can't be criticized to such an extent to say you're an out-and-out liar. But obviously Judge Desai found that his evidence is not reasonably possibly true. In a criminal case, the defense doesn't have to prove anything. The state has to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. But the version has to be reasonably possibly true, and that wasn't the case here.
Yeah, so talk to us about this thing of circumstantial evidence. So there was nothing forensic that could prove that Henri was the man who swung the axe that killed his mother, his father, and his brother. But as the judge put it himself, each piece of evidence on its own is not enough to establish guilt, but together all the pieces conclude the puzzle. Was that what the case was here?
Absolutely. Circumstantial evidence is made up of a whole lot of different pieces. That at the end, to find somebody guilty on circumstantial evidence, you know, all of it comes crushing down on the neck of an accused person. If you've got to draw inferences, so it's got to be the only inference from all of that evidence. If there are other inferences that can be drawn, and an accused version is reasonably possibly true, well, then he must get the benefit of the doubt. But as Terry was saying, the case rested on, was there an intruder or intruders or not? So early on in the judgment of Judge Desai, when he said that there was no indication of an intruder, you know, the house was right in the middle of the complex. And why would people go into, you know, right the middle in a situation where they could have been caught by the security and go and then bludgeon what was taken, what was the motive behind going to kill a whole family, and why would they leave a survivor, Henri, an eyewitness to the incident? Because they would have thought anyway that Marli was virtually dead because she had such serious injuries. But the injuries that that Van Breda supposedly suffered were found to be self-inflicted and weren't particularly serious. So an eyewitness is left behind. So, the whole version about the intruder, let's go back to Oscar Pistorius' case.
Yeah.
The intruder, it's a good defense to say there was an intruder who broke into the house. And in some instances, that is correct. And obviously, you can kill an intruder, or an intruder might kill you. But the version that he portrayed and how he tried to manipulate the evidence at the scene was sort of seriously problematic for him at the end of the day.
Tammy, speak to us about the atmosphere at court today. Were any of his family members there, and were there any, sort of interaction between Henri and the people in the gallery? What was the atmosphere like?
If I can just first mention the fact that Alet Janse Van Rensburg was there today. She is Henri's girlfriend. She had not previously attended any of the sittings. She arrived this morning with him. We were waiting outside the chambers, and we saw them through the window running up the stairs and running back down, and eventually they came out. And it was quite surprising to see Daniela, because she has always been at the chambers, which is right across the road. And we've seen her during lunch break smoking with them and them chatting. And so today was the first time she actually walked with him into court. She sat through the judgment. They held hands when they arrived. Henri, I think she brought lots of sort of like calmness to him, because he does sometimes appear a bit anxious. And but today there was absolutely no anxiety. I think he did preparation. Like we heard that he went to visit his grandma in Johannesburg last week. So probably knowing that there was a real possibility of him being convicted, and then obviously that happened today. With her, she obviously appeared really nervous, because there was, imagine, dozens of cameras watching you, every move, following you all the way to the stairs. But at the court, he sat in the dock, and she sat behind him. There's a little gallery, which isn't really for the public, but she sat at the back there. And after court, she just sort of ran out. And one of our journalists saw her. She's appeared emotional. But inside court, it was, I think there was, after certain sections of the judgment was read, and people started drawing their own conclusions. There was only one logical conclusion. So when it came to the actual judgment, the actual verdict being read out, there were no gasps, there were no looks of shock, absolutely nothing. Everybody knew, even he knew, and so no high sort of moments of emotion or anything like that. It was actually a bit surprising, I think, I think if you think of somebody being convicted of 3 murders, of trying to kill their sister, and of tampering with the scene, and I mean moving your dying brother's body around, these are serious charges, but there was absolutely nothing.
Even as the judge, criticized his version, basically called him a liar.
There were some frowns. There were some there were sort of moments of defiance, if you can call it that, where he would look up, and then he would just sort of look down again. I don't know, there was one point where he appeared to be making notes or something, was looking down. There were times where it looked like he was falling asleep, but then again, if he had to sit through an entire day.
It was a long day.
So in fairness, I do understand. And he probably got very little sleep last night, knowing that was probably, or possibly, going to be his last night of freedom, which it was.
Yeah. So tonight he'll be spending his first night in prison, William, and then on the 5th of June we'll be hearing his sentence. And in the meantime, he'll be spending the time in the hospital wing of Pollsmoor until his sentencing. So what are the legal avenues he has left now?
Well, let me just start with the hospital wing at Pollsmoor. It isn't a hospital.
It's not like the Mediclinic with hospital wing.
It certainly isn't. And I have criticized it over years. There's one psychiatrist for 6,000 or 7,000 prisoners and one psychologist. So the medical treatment that you get is problematic. But at least you're not stuck with a whole bunch of 30 or 40 other prisoners, and there will be medical attention close by, and he will receive his medication. The next step is for sentencing to take place. The defense is going to be presenting evidence in mitigation of sentence. The problem they have is this is premeditated murder, and we've got 3 charges. The attempted murder isn't obviously within the ambit of minimum sentencing laws, but it's very serious, as is tampering with evidence. People go to jail for that normally. So the defense has to establish substantial and compelling circumstances to try and persuade the judge to give less than life. But now you've got 3 potential life sentences.
Right.
So the judge is not going to give 3 life sentences, one after the other. He would, if he decides that there's no substantial and compelling circumstances or not sufficient to justify a lesser sentence, he can impose 3 life sentences, but he would I believe he would let them run concurrently. But certainly we're looking at a very, very lengthy period of direct imprisonment because of the very, very serious nature of this crime.
Of course. And then, finally, Tammy, at the end of the day, all the focus has been on Henri van Breda, but 3 people have lost their lives, and one does get a sense that finally there's been justice for Martin, Teresa, and Rudy.
Indeed. I think not enough has sort of been reported on the actual people it was that died. Unfortunately, not enough was actually revealed by family. They've been very quiet and private about the situation, which is understandable, especially considering who the accused was. But, Martin was described as a hardworking man, an exceptionally hardworking man who built this sort of empire and wanted the best for his children, for his wife, for his daughter, for all of them. His wife was apparently an avid cook. She loved cooking. The brother was apparently a great guy, much loved at the university, attended in Australia. Marli was a teenager. She was just a girl. And to have your life really completely turned upside down and not even being able to make sense of it because you can't remember the details thereof. It's exceptionally traumatizing. And so I guess there needs to be also an understanding, because the state, the prosecutor, Susan Galloway, had said that Marli had said she doesn't want to be made available to a brother's defense, and which inevitably you wouldn't really be able to use her because she can't remember anything. But the fact that this was said in court, she doesn't want to even consider it. It was also a bit awkward, I think. But it was, I think, exceptionally hard on the family, considering that this was something that happened within the family. We only had Uncle Andre du Toit that's been attending proceedings, often, not always, but often. He would always say hi to Henri, never sort of like overly emotional or the engagement that they had. And Uncle Andre also never wanted to speak to the media. And the only other time we've seen the family was when the family came to come and testify, when Martin's brothers, twin brothers, were there, when he came to come and speak about the fact that his brother had no enemies and that he was much loved and respected by his colleagues and people that he worked with. So I think this is probably going to be a very difficult time for that family, exceptionally difficult.
Particularly, I think, now it's been accepted that his version is a lie. So what really happened? What caused this? I mean, so many cases that I do that one looks at, there has to be a trigger. And often, look, I can't go into too much detail with a client who gives me a particular defense on a case. And obviously the same with the lawyers. They fought the case to the bitter end, which is the job they must do. But the family and everybody out there is going to be saying, what did happen? Was it drugs? Was there an argument? What took place? And why didn't he come up with that story from the beginning? If he'd come up with a reason as to why he acted this way, then one might have a little bit more sympathy. Not completely, because this is a brutal conduct.
But it explains,
It
it
does.
sort of makes everything full circle.
And we all want an explanation.
Exactly.
We all
Absolutely.
like to know why people do things. And this
Yeah.
is the interesting thing with court cases. It doesn't always come out. You know, when a person's evidence is rejected. And sometimes a person pleading guilty who comes and says, look, this is what happened. I was driven to this. This was the emotional breakdown. Then the public might have a little bit more sympathy. But here,
And
you know,
there's leniency also,
Of course.
because you played open cards with the
course.
court.
Mercy.
But when you don't, well then you're leaving your
Absolutely.
decision, your future to someone who has to make then his own inferences from what you are not saying. So I think it would be in his best interest, really in his best interest, to just lay it all out, because I don't think there was an indication of an appeal. So, sorry, so it looks like they are going to be preparing for sentencing, and this is not going to be a 10-year sentence, it's not going to be a 20-year sentence. He is only 23 years old. He is going to be in for a long time. So I think also, in fairness to his family, to his sister, to just give as much details as he has, or as he can give it would make things, I think, a bit more bearable.
I think, having said that, I find it hardly ever happens that, let's say, after conviction to sentence, that an accused turns around and says, look, actually I was talking absolute nonsense. This is what happened. I want to now be honest, and I want to be remorseful. In one or two cases, but it doesn't normally happen. But maybe it's something he needs to look at, because that could help a lot when it comes to sentencing.
Well, there you have it. It seems that we're going to be left wondering for now, and might for the foreseeable future be doing that. Thank you so much for our studio guests. Please stay up to date with the story. We'll be following you through the sentencing hearings, the sentencing on the 5th of June. Stay up to date on News24.